on camera. I don't know what I win as a prize.
Okay.
Mark, where are you in New York? We already talked about this.
Little place called Riverdale. So it's the very edge of the Bronx. Still technically New York City, but anyone who's actually from the Bronx will.
You're like, but everyone doesn't count it.
If I tell someone, if I meet someone and they're like from the Bronx, and I'm like, oh, me too. And then they're like, where? And I say Riverdale, I can see it in their eyes. They're just like,
they're like, come on. Technically.
Oh, that's great.
Our claim to fame is that supposedly the wedding scene from The Godfather was filmed kind of down the street from where I live. That's
and that's like the main. All I know is
I love the claim to fame being.
Yeah, I get a train. That's the image on Google Maps is a train driving by.
Well, yeah, we do have a Metro North station. Yeah, so but Riverdale's it's a really nice place. It's all the costs of living in New York City and none of the benefits.
Yeah, anytime you say our claim to fame is kind of maybe.
Well, I actually took that as fact until someone recently said no, and in fact, there's a place in Staten Island that makes the same claim. So now I don't know.
Interesting.
It's better. It's better than Staten Island. I assure you.
Oh, where I live is better than Staten Island. You could say that pretty much about anything. Yeah.
Wow, we have somebody from Melbourne, Australia here.
Nice.
It's already like tomorrow there.
It is. I studied abroad in Australia, and it was so funny. Flying out, I sat next to a girl that never had her 21st birthday because they just skipped it on the flight. And then coming back, I'll never forget sitting on a beach in Fiji and looking at my watch and being like, I'm landing in LA right now. The international date line's a weird thing. But all right. Well, we've been good.
We can get started. Just take it away, Jason.
We can do
it. All right.
In the middle of a conversation.
Cool. Well, I mean, this bodes well towards the actual conversation we'll be having for the next hour or so. So it's a whole lot better than people that don't get along. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we can get started with this. All right, let's go into the presentation. All right. So thanks everybody for joining us. My name's Jason Hubbard. I am COO at RevGenius, and excited to have Connor Jeffers, who is CEO and founder of Aptitude 8, and Mark Lerner, Director of Growth Marketing at DillHub. I would say welcome, guys, but I think we got that out of the way. But excited to jump into this with you. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. If you guys weren't aware, I got my start and really kind of got going in the B2B SaaS space at a company called Cirrus Insight. And so we were a Salesforce integration for the inbox, and so everything we did was Salesforce and CRM. And so our primary value add was trying to get people to use the thing, and as a result, we got pretty deep into all the ins and outs of what do you actually do with that, including a lot of stuff we'll be talking on today. So like I said, this is a very near and dear to my heart conversation to have. But welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm super excited about this. Like I said, my name is Mark Lerner. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at DealHub, and really excited to have this conversation. I think it's more relevant than ever, and it's really nice that we have Jason giving us, the view from kind of Salesforce land. Connor has a pretty great view from HubSpot land. I think it really kind of rounds things out. So it's going to be an awesome conversation.
Yeah, I mean, on that front, Connor, I'm sure you've seen the same, but increasingly it's actually been interesting over the years seeing HubSpot become more and more prominent as, a centralized CRM and marketing automation platform. But I also see arguably the majority of Salesforce instances still using HubSpot for an email marketing standpoint. And obviously then you've got to deal with all of the alignment between the different platforms and all the stuff like that. Which is a great segue into GTM unification. So I'd say, preface this for the audience. There's a ton of really good information in these slides. like we talked about before we hopped on, I think all three of us hate talking through slides to people about as much as an audience typically doesn't like that. So we'll use these as broad-based sort of guides for the conversation, some stuff we might touch on. For audience members, if there's anything you see in these slides, you want to say, hey, I really want to dive into that, and we're not jumping into that, please speak up, as well as dropping any questions into the Q&A section throughout this. We'll definitely set aside some time at the end to answer those questions, but also if we see anything particularly pertinent that's timely based off of what we're talking about, then we can hop into that question kind of at that moment in time. But let's start off with, just at a high level, what exactly do you mean by GTM unification?
I'll let Connor start.
I think for me, and it's interesting because I think when you were talking about at the outset, and one of the things I did our full day marketing offsite yesterday around some of our positioning and everything else. And a lot of what we do as an organization is focus on sort of like, where is HubSpot going and how can we be, 6 to 9 months ahead of where that puck is going so that we can sort of be there once it arrives. And I think for us, the big narrative that we're tying into all of these pieces is around how a lot of folks are starting to not look at this as I have a sales function, I have a marketing function, and I have a service function. And increasingly, I have a GTM team. And we're seeing that with the folks that are leading those functions being sort of unified across these various groups. We're seeing it with RevOps and the unification of the operational infrastructure across all of these different teams. And I think what we see in both our customer base, what we sort of espouse and market, is thinking about your sales, marketing, and your service functions as one function. And I think that the sort of logical extension of that then comes to like, wouldn't it be cool if they all had similar tools or they worked together well? But I think that fundamental component of really thinking about all of these in the same way. And anecdotally, last week, there's been a lot of planning for us. Last week, I did our SKO for our services team and our sales team, and we didn't include marketing because I was like, oh, well, we'll do this thing, and then like we'll do the marketing offsite, and like I can't be in two places at once. And then I basically spent the first hour and a half yesterday being like, here's what you missed, because apparently all of this is actually really unified. And I think when I talk about that, that's sort of what that means to me. But I'm happy to hand it to Mark.
Yeah, no, I think you touched
how about you, Mark?
Yeah, I think you touched on the zeitgeist pretty well, and I'm really psyched I got to use that word. But
I was about to say, like, that's $1 million word
for the
there.
day.
Yeah. I said a word. Yeah, I said another fancy word of the day yesterday. My manager hadn't heard this word before. It was nascent. So I'm 2 for 2. No, but I think that we've seen this kind of evolution, right? It was the whole idea of RevOps was in part to break down silos between these, kind of customer facing, revenue generating, revenue touching go-to-market organizations. So that, you don't have competing incentives, competing data, all of that. And I think that, we hit a point in the kind of quote unquote post-COVID world where market conditions changed. The cost of customer acquisition increased, became harder. People were looking for revenue across kind of their entire go-to-market, including existing customers, for example. And therefore, the idea of putting sales, marketing, support, success, all of that kind of closer together became more and more relevant. I had even heard recently of sales or a company where sales was reporting up to the chief customer officer. I think that might be an overcorrection to the kind of current situation, but I think it speaks to really this idea that it's not growth at all costs, it's not customers acquisition at all costs. It's really getting the most out of what you have. That includes upsell, cross sell, leveraging your teams like service and marketing, success, support to actually increase lifetime value.
No, I love that. And you go ahead, Connor.
I was just gonna say, I think to your point, Mark, I love and I think chief customer officer gets at least I think of like how HubSpot does it as an example, right? Like there's a sort of like RevOps, sales, service, marketing, and sort of the things that roll into that. I think unifying those makes a ton of sense. And I think what we see from sort of organizations in market is that I think of this idea of we sold something, high five, we're done now, is not true. And I think increasingly, as you get into a lot more competition, a lot more scrutiny of solutions and outcomes, what are the expectations that you set during the sales process? How does that impact the expectations of the product, of the service, of the delivery function? And making sure that that's aligned across the board is, I think, part and parcel to having anybody be a happy customer, which if you don't have happy customers, then, it's a short or long march to death. But I think that either of those is certainly an option.
Yeah.
I love that you guys anticipated a direction I was going to take this anyway. But, obviously anybody who's paying attention knows that, year and a half-ish ago, the ground really shifted. And you had lending markets tighten up, you had interest rates rise, you had now much more viable places for people to go invest and put their money. The cost of raising money and maintaining debt went way up, all the way to the point where we've seen quite a few VC firms actually fold under this. And so that has put all kinds of pressure on organizations to move away from that growth at all costs model that you mentioned, Mark. This really dominated the space for a couple of decades plus, into like, hey, we've actually got to turn this into a viable business. I mean, imagine that. We're actually going to go and run something that might have a reasonable path to profitability. But whenever you do that, obviously all kinds of things that shift with that. And you can't focus on just logos. You can't focus on just, net new, customers coming in. You've got to actually make sure that, like, are these the right people, and that you're taking care of them and you're taking them all the way through to retention and renewal. But the other big piece of it, I think that's going to drive a lot of this conversation we're having, is that also requires a cross-functional organization. And so somebody that can break down these barriers between different teams, different go-to-market motions, different points of management of that user journey and all of that stuff. And I wind up talking about this a lot. And I'd say the vast majority of the time, probably 75, 80+% of the time, we spend most, if not all the time, talking about how do you do this philosophically? How do you get alignment, from, leadership and management down through ICs that, hey, this is something we actually want to commit to doing. And we're going to go do this cross-functional GTM, ABM, ABS, whatever you want to call it, strategy, which, let's call it. That's a big part of it. And if you can't get that out of the way, then none of the rest is really going to happen. But I see way too many people think that that's the end of the conversation. Turns out anybody that's actually going to try and implement or execute any of this stuff knows that's where it really just begins. And the really heavy lifting is actually, how do you operationalize this? How do you actually manage the tech stack around that? How do you actually make sure everybody's working off of the same page? You're not, stepping on each other's toes. Like I was telling somebody literally yesterday, I was like, ever tried to manage an outbound team going after named accounts while you're simultaneously giving air cover from email marketing and content while running ads at those same accounts and those same people? And oh, by the way, guess what? The vast majority of those people are not going to reply to your reps going out to them. They're going to come to your website and fill out a form. And so now you got an inbound team that's going to work off of the leads coming in. You got an outbound team that's going after the same accounts you're trying to attribute. Is that, coming in off of content, email marketing, ads? Do you need to pay commission to your BDRs that are doing outbound and or inbound? Like, talk about a tough nut to crack. And all of that gets back to a lot of the stuff that we have here. So let's go into that just from a operational viewpoint. Where do you guys begin with something that complex and that big?
So I started like my first foray into this was when I first started doing services and freelancing work in the very beginning. Like that, what you just described is I would just charge. I'd be like, look, for like $5,000 a month, like I will manage all of the stuff that makes that function. And that was a really great deal, and people were excited to pay it, right? And I think to your point, what we were doing is, okay, we need to build all this stuff in outreach. We need to sync all this data back down to Salesforce. We have these forms coming in through HubSpot. When those happen, we need to have a trigger in Salesforce that auto converts that lead into a contact that merges into this piece and updates a campaign member status so I can send that to outreach. And some percentage of the time, one of those things breaks or doesn't fire quickly enough. And, you know, you have a BDR team that's like, well, we'll never hit our goals now. And that's sort of where you end up spending your time. This is really where I think that what we're seeing in market, and Aptitude is a HubSpot partner. I have some HubSpot shaped hammerness to me, but I'm not a Salesforce bad, HubSpot good person here. But I do think that this is something I think HubSpot is really nailing right now in their messaging and their approach and sort of how they're managing it, which is that exact problem you just described. If you are running on Marketing Hub for all of your marketing efforts, you're running on Sales Hub for core CRM, and your sales team is working out of the prospecting workspace, the problem you just described doesn't exist. And the reason is you have no data to sync across all of these components. You're running off of the same contact database. You're running off of the same automation infrastructure, and solving for that exact problem is something that I think that's why organizations invest in RevOps. And by no means do you say, hey, if we're on HubSpot, that means I don't need any ops infrastructure. Like, someone still has to build all that stuff. But the breadth and the level of investment that you need from both a internal team, external consulting, expertise across all of these different platforms and tools, I think is orders of magnitude. And it goes up every time that you add additional tools into your stack that someone needs to have expertise on and manage and orchestrate. And I think that that's really where we're seeing the resonance in the market from folks that are looking at this and saying, man, we spend a lot of money making all these things work together. Like, could this be simpler? And I think that's where we're seeing this sort of all in one, how can I consolidate? And the same thing happening with Gong and Outreach and everybody trying to say, hey, we'll just add more of that stuff into our revenue technology.
Yeah. And I think, you know, what you were saying, Jason, about, you know, the ground shifting under us, I think is, you know, it's like more and more clear to me every day, kind of, you know, seeing it happen. You know, I think there were a lot of folks, a lot of companies that were, dismissive, you know, assumed that 2021 was the norm, and, you know, kind of this is just a bump in the road. And a lot of them got washed out because they were not, in their DNA, didn't consider adaptability to changing market dynamics to be kind of a critical element. You know, we talk about, you know, getting buy-in to these things. And I think that in a time where it wasn't do or die, it was probably harder to get by. And I think now it's just like, you know, that's how if you're going to survive, this is what you're going to have to do. I think the people that were kind of, you know, dismissive of the need to do some of these things, well, you know, we've been doing it like this forever. Why would we change? You know, if they're still viable, I think they're probably realize that something needs to change. You know, we saw that with, you know, 5-7 years ago, the title of RevOps was still kind of a niche, right? And then last year it was the #1 most sought after job on LinkedIn. I think Forbes found it to be like the #4 most popular role or fastest growing role in 2022 or 2023. I apologize. So I think that we've kind of caught up now to where things are. And I just, to me, it's like I kind of bang this drum, but as companies are taking stock, looking internally, looking how they can consolidate tech stack processes, all these things, really putting the ability to adapt and know that what is true today is very much unlikely to be true tomorrow or 6 months from now, and building that in is critical.
No, I think that's great, and I'd love to hear from, you know, some of the audience. It'd be great to come back to some of the stuff towards the end, but, you know, here's some of these specific struggles that, you know, some of you guys are trying to address or get your arms around relative to this, because frankly, I don't know somebody on a go-to-market team, especially somebody in RevOps, that doesn't have some piece of this that they're banging their head against the wall with. And you know, I think it's to your point, Mark, the biggest persona that's grown within Rev Genius over the last year plus has been RevOps. It's also been very interesting because they tend to be some of the most vocal and collaborative of the personas and people that we have within the community. And I think, you know, it doesn't really take a rocket scientist to figure out why. Like, we're all trying to be really creative about how to figure out and accomplish and tackle like what are typically fairly complex problems. And so, you know, we naturally lean on each other to try and help problem solve with this. A theme I heard from both of you in that, though, and it's something that I think is really starting to come to dominate relative to these changes that have happened over the last year and a half plus, has been a shift from not just growth at all costs, but from a focus of best of breed to good enough, but easier to manage and operationalize. It sounds like both of you, from what you said, have seen similar things. Would that be correct?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
What do you
I
think?
think the only thing that I would clarify is I don't think I think that's a false choice and a false dichotomy. I don't think it's either best of breed or it's like let's choose something that has a whole bunch of bad components that we have to settle for, but at least they're all sort of interconnected. I think what we're seeing is that the value of interconnectivity is itself like the core feature, as opposed to you're settling for something else. And I don't think this is any different than you could give me the world's best software application that is 100x better than anything else in the market, but like it's on-prem and I have to host it and I would never buy it. Like it's just no. And I think that this is just a continued extrapolation of that.
110%. It reminds me, since my very, very early days at Cirrus, I'd be talking to somebody about Salesforce versus X, Y, or Z as an alternative CRM. And I would say, the great thing about Salesforce is it's insanely powerful and you can build it to do damn near anything that you want it to do. The bad part about Salesforce is you have to build it to do anything that you want it to do. And so the fact, and a similar story on, so many people use it increasingly as sort of a hub and spoke model of, hey, everything can plug into Salesforce and then we can use that to push and pull data in and out of all these other things. And it's like, great, that makes things really flexible as far as the things that you can use on top of in addition to Salesforce. But every one of those nodes you put in there, increase that level of complexity of what you're trying to manage and what you're trying to do versus having something that, it's the Apple versus PC model. It just works, or you can make it do anything, but you got to make it do everything. And so, and clearly we see where Apple has had so much success on that other end of that spectrum and being able to do that. Above and beyond just the cost, operational costs and stuff like that, as well as just the overall challenges of trying to drive people across what's oftentimes a bloated and overly complex tech stack. Like, what are some of the big costs and things that you see people running into whenever they don't prioritize that tight integration between systems?
I mean, I think what we see is you end up having a bunch of teams that are stepping on each other's toes. You end up having a ton of employee frustration because everyone on your team is like, wow, it's awful not having a single view of what's going on. And I run into every other team constantly. And I think that you see organizations have to invest a ton of money later because they have a tremendous amount of technical debt, and then it results in downtime. And I think it's one of the things where there's in praise of maintenance, like if you never pave the road and if you never expand the lanes and you never do anything, you have to shut down the whole highway and do a lane expansion project, and everyone's pissed off about it forever. And the impact of that to your customers, to your team, to everyone that's involved is constant.
Yeah. And I'll take it a step further. It's like, when you're talking about more complex and growing and scaling companies, the time it takes to do the road work, right? By the time you finish it, there are potholes already on the portion you've done at the beginning, and you have to start over. And you never actually are able to affect change in real time. It kind of goes back to that adaptability as being a core thing, because if you take all this time, if it requires a complete kind of repaving of the road each time, you're never going to actually be able to go to market with these things because you're constantly playing catch up. And I think that speaks to, we talk about, is it all in one? Is it multi-platform? I think those are important questions, but is it flexible? Is it something that if changes are needed to be made, that it's not going to be a 6-figure investment that takes 6 months to make a kind of simple or critical change? Like, it can be done within the time of a given sprint. If you, for example, as we kind of talk about the commerce aspect of things, if a company needs to make a pricing change, does that require a complete re-implementation of one of these tools? And if so, how long would that take? Is that really, a feasible kind of thing, especially in a market like today where these things need to happen, quickly? And in my experience, no, it's not. You need to be able to adapt and change, and your tech stack, your CRM being kind of the core of that, needs to be able to do that in a way that doesn't, isn't, requiring some huge investment and time for every little thing. I don't know if that's a hot take or how like that's kind of my.
No, I think that's extremely accurate, and you guys both hinted at it, but I think it's worth calling out. Like, so you've got all of the operational, cost and overhead, the technical side of it, all of that stuff. You've got the fact that no sooner do you stop building than it becomes, outdated and antiquated. But the other piece to it, and have dealt with this my entire career, you got to get people to actually use the thing. You got to get them to use it correctly. And so every time that you've got, one, the more complex it is, the heavier lift that is to ever get anybody to do. And two, every time that you go in and you shift and change something, then it makes it that much harder to get them to, to actually do it the way you want it to. But you start doing that stuff too much, and you lose your team members, you lose their interest, you lose their buy-in, all of that stuff. And so, trying to do it with a stick and entirely a stick becomes a really, really difficult way to try and get people to do things. You want to try and have a carrot in there driving people as much as possible, but to do that, they've got to see the value of why they need to go and follow these processes, use the tech, log the stuff, all of those things. And if you've got something that's overly complex, that ain't going to happen. Even if you've got something that's perfectly integrated and really, really simple, if you keep moving it and changing it on them, it's becoming complex for them. And so you've got to be able to have something that's easy, intuitive to understand, that's going to be relatively stable and consistent. Otherwise, you're chasing your tail both on the tech and operations side of things, as well as the implementation and adoption side.
Yeah. Hey, Connor, I'm actually interested. So this is the second of the 5 strategies. The previous GTM unification was the first. I saw a question in the chat here. The commerce-powered CRM. So this idea of being commerce-powered and creating a commerce-powered CRM. What is that? How do you define that? What is a commerce-powered CRM?
Yeah. So I think for a lot of organizations, the CRM experience is sort of, this is where I store my customer data. This is where my sales team works. And then there's, how do we charge our customers? How do we bill our customers? When was the last time our customers paid? All of that's managed in a billing system or an ERP, and it's separate from and disconnected from that core CRM. And I think not dissimilarly from what sort of Jason talked about at the outset of how do we organize and coordinate this marketing experience, this outbound experience, and how do we get all of that to work together? What we see is a lot of customers are trying to do the same thing, but around their billing data, which is like, I want to talk to all my customers who are subscribed to this product, but aren't subscribed to this other product. And I want to interlace that with some CRM segmentation, and I want to target those people, or I want to segment those folks. And so when we think about sort of this commerce powered CRM experience, it's how do I get all of the data around who are my customers, what do they pay, what do they pay for, when did they last pay, are they lapsing, and connect that and combine that into the CRM itself. And I think that's a trend that's really driving, like HubSpot natively is starting to push into this with their Commerce Hub. It's definitely geared a little bit more SMB, but they're starting to do some of that. And then we're seeing sort of organizations kind of constantly ask us. And so much so, one of the most common conversations that we had at Aptitude 8 with mainly SaaS businesses was, we have Stripe, we have all these things going on in Stripe. We're trying to get that data into HubSpot. We can't figure out how, and any of the integrations don't give us what we're actually looking for. And that was sort of the genesis of one of the first products that we built and launched, Zebra, around that whole problem. And so I think when we think commerce powered CRM is wherever you're doing whatever your data is on billing, customer, subscription data, getting that combined and connected into your CRM infrastructure so that you sort of have that unified view of who those customers are.
Yeah, and I think that this is, coming from Deal Hub, we're kind of we're a CPQ, we're kind of native integration with Salesforce as well as HubSpot. We kind of look at it from, there was this concept of quote to cash that was born. And I think that we've shifted the conversation from quote to cash to quote to revenue. I think that, the quote to cash, again, looks at it from this old view of it's like a finite period of time where money hits the bank, it's over, right?
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you cash the check, you walk away. That's it. Mic drop, walk away. And I think that this speaks to, we're talking about it's the subscription economy, but even kind of the next step of the subscription economy where we have pricing models that aren't just your standard seat or package. They have various SKUs in them where it could be partially usage based, partially service. You have co-terming, and the complexity gets bigger and bigger. Obviously, a smaller stage company, it can be simple, but as you grow, especially to be competitive in the market, and especially as you try to capture larger customers that require more customization, ensuring that is deeply integrated into what should be your single source of truth, being the CRM, is important. And it's not only important for the average sales rep who is going to go into your CRM, but because the CRM acts as this kind of central repository, we're talking further down the line when finance is dealing with it, when there's reporting being done, if the company is being audited, being able to know for sure that what is being reported here, what revenue is being recognized, is actually what was charged and what was delivered, and having that, integrity of data from, as we said, from quote to revenue, and ensuring that it all kind of lives in the CRM in that way, is super critical. And I think that from our perspective from Deal Hub, that's really kind of where our focus is. And we see this as a huge both problem and opportunity in the space.
Where do you see people struggle most?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is still a mindset, and we talked about it, where maybe we won't use the best in class terminology, but that each organization, each person within a company kind of had their say about what is their tool of choice that they want to. They would do a free trial, kind of like what they saw, and they would kind of get budget for it. And then there was this kind of reckoning that we've all seen. And I think what people started to see is, there was this notion that everybody should get the best, the thing they want the most that helps them do their job better. But there was a lack of consideration about the bigger picture, right? And I think that revenue operations tends to be the one that considers that bigger picture. And so what I see as a big problem is the kind of, we call technical debt as a result of that, there's a lot more of a critical eye on budget and tech stack right now. And there are people that are just trying to kind of follow the wire and figure out where it goes. And what is it that if I pull on this lever, what happens over here, because they're so complicated right now. So that's a lot of the problem I see, I think. Yeah.
That sounds like the solution that I've had to revert to way too often whenever I've inherited a tech stack or a CRM, where it's like, well, we don't know what that does. Like, let's turn it off and see what happens.
It's the guy cutting the wires of the bomb, and in the end, he's like, it's yellow or red. I'm just going to try one, and like hold my breath. I think that metaphor actually is pretty relevant for RevOps generally. It's like, somebody who comes into an organization, so they step into a new RevOps role. There's all these fields and all these objects and all these things that are just kind of, on top, different people in that role kind of built on top, and everyone was too afraid to delete the thing from the last person because they didn't really know what it did. And then you walk in and, there's all these redundant fields, and it's just a total mess. And at a certain point, you have to just kind of take a risk and say, we have to kind of put some of this on the chopping block. But that's part of the ensuring that data integrity is not only ensuring that all the data is getting to the right place, but that you're able to break, sift between the noise and the signal. That's really important, because you can have data overload, but if you don't know what you're looking at, you might as well have no data. And actually, Connor, I'm interested to hear, if you've seen that, like if there's been too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this, like, one of the things we talk a lot about. I actually think this is a really good segue into our next slide here and topic, if we want to move to it, because I think it's tied to this, which is what you just said, which is everyone sort of starts with, I need to put all of the data into the CRM, and you end up having these conversations around, like, I need bi-directional real-time integrations with these things, and I need all of the data and all of the fields and all of the records. And then what happens is, and then everything needs to be searchable because I need to find all of it. And then you type anything into a search bar and you can't find anything because you just get like, oh, this is the account record. This is the PO. This is the quote. This is the deal. Like, and you're like, all of these have the company name on them. So they're exactly what you're looking for. And I think that experience really degrades the power of the CRM. I think one of the things, and this is specifically a HubSpot screenshot. This is something I think Salesforce, as Jason sort of touched on previously, this is what Salesforce is best in class at and has been for a really long time, is this configurability and extensibility. And you have the entirety of the Salesforce ISV ecosystem of products that are just built on top of Salesforce. And the opportunity in HubSpot land to do that is really, really new. This was all sort of, the screenshots here are HubSpot announced the CRM cards, which basically lets you develop and build on top of HubSpot and create your own applications that run inside of someone's HubSpot CRM portal. And so you can now build these sort of fully native applications that just run in one HubSpot account. And I think this is something Salesforce excels at. It's something is relatively new for the HubSpot platform. But I think if you're looking at CRM technology, this should be extremely high on your list if you're thinking about an enterprise and configurability and scalability, because there are things that your CRM just won't be able to do itself. And there is data that users are going to want to access and interface with that either shouldn't or can't be stored in your CRM. So this example is sort of this like PII or HIPAA data, and we've used CRM cards to sort of interface with PII or HIPAA compliant software so that nothing is ever hosted in HubSpot, because you can't host HIPAA or PII data in HubSpot, but it's hosted somewhere else. But a rep can access it, view it on the screen. A rep can log it and store it in a HIPAA compliant database. And kind of you can take that same concept and do a similar thing where maybe you don't need all of the shipments that your organization is doing stored as objects in the CRM, but you do want someone to be able to go to a company record and be like, hey, did we ship that thing that we said we were going to ship to them? And like, when's the date it's going to arrive? And I don't need automation. I don't need reporting. I just need somebody to be able to access that information in the platform that they're already using. And so that configurability and extensibility matters a lot for being able to make the CRM do what it does. And what's been interesting for A8 is we've kind of moved from, hey, we're doing CRM implementations, we're doing a lot of that standard HubSpot stuff, but so much of our work these days is building and designing and implementing these types of applications for customers that are trying to say, hey, look, HubSpot does 90% of what I need, and there's this one thing that we need to be able to do, and we're willing to invest in it, but we had nowhere to build that before. And sort of on top of this functionality, you can now build those pieces, which I think is really one of those main components that jumps HubSpot from, hey, there's an SMB product, it's got out-of-the-box functionality, to it does so much stuff for all the reasons Jason talked about. The early days of Salesforce, like that was the pitch.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm interested from that perspective. It's like, how do you think about when you're working with, let's say, one of your clients, or, maybe we can make this CRM agnostic and just kind of talk more generally. When you're kind of talking about the extendability of the CRM instance for, let's say, a sales rep, how do you architect that so that it doesn't become just everything, over time? Oh, we need to add this and then add that. And then by the end, it's the same problem. It's that there's so much noise. It doesn't say, so how do you, is there like a framework to think about that through?
I mean, I think one of the first questions.
Good time to go to the next one.
I think I actually forgot that this was the next one. You guys are ahead of me. I was like, oh man, my short answer, and then we can kind of get into this whole piece of it, right? Is should the CRM do this? And I think a lot of people, and I think this is especially true of consulting firms, of implementation shops, right? Is they're like, ooh, wow, we could build this, right? Like we could build this crazy thing. And then you get to this position where, wow, we've built something that isn't usable. It doesn't actually help people. It's very cool. Like it's very cool. We can show you how cool it is. And it's sort of like, you know, this custom rigged car that we set up in the thing. But if you don't know the exact start sequence, and if you don't take it for the right amount of maintenance, like it doesn't work, it doesn't get you anywhere. And I think that the more that you first want to ask, is this a CRM thing? I think a lot of people, and what I see happening right now that's really interesting in the HubSpot ecosystem, it's very similar to what I saw in not even the early days of the Salesforce ecosystem, but anyone who's either built on Salesforce platform or worked in Salesforce orgs has stumbled across that thing someone spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of energy building, and like no one uses it because you're like, yeah, it turns out we could do this, but like going and getting a solution for this particular problem just made way more sense. And I think we're starting to see the early days of people doing that with HubSpot as they're getting more of this functionality because they're like, oh my God, my sandbox goes forever. This is so exciting. And we're seeing that. But I think, should the CRM actually do this? Is this a core CRM functionality and we're just extending it? Or are we trying to build the CRM to like be a project management solution or be an ERP or be a purchasing solution? And like, it isn't supposed to do that. There are entire categories of software that can do those things. And if you need light extensibility to get you a little bit more there, that's great. But when you're really thinking about, I am not going to use any of the standard stuff that this thing has in order to solve that problem. And the last thing, sorry, I'm very passionate about this topic. Apparently, I've just learned. The last thing that I would sort of put onto that is something that anyone, and I started my career in Salesforce implementation and consulting services. You could always tell a Salesforce instance that was built by the CTO or an early developer or somebody, because they would not use any of the standard out of the box stuff because they're like, I don't want to be controlled by this. I'm going to just do everything custom myself. And then you end up having to maintain and build, and none of the benefits of having the platform actually matter anymore. You've just built custom software with limitations, which sucks. And so I think we see that too. And so all of that to say, should it be CRM? Is it actually going to be usable? Who is it good for? Is really where you should start.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by this. There's such a importance placed on sales rep should never leave the CRM. We don't want them to go anywhere but right here, you know. And I think that pressure ends up kind of helping create these just, you know, overly busy interfaces that people on the sales team or other teams within the go-to-market end up looking at. You know, do you think that there's too much emphasis put on that, or is it truly absolutely critical? That was meant for Connor. Yeah.
Just
throwing it out there, whoever catches it.
I think you have to take into context who is that end user, right? I think if you understand, like, different end users are going to have different thresholds for the level of guidance and customization and adoption that they need to be able to have, right? If you're building a solution for your frontline sales team, you are a high volume sales organization. You have lots of sellers everywhere. Like, all that matters is the usability of the thing at the end of the day. Like, you just don't have the bandwidth and time to train, coach, support. Like, it's just too much. And I think that this is why you see organizations in the really early days. Like, this is one of the things that makes startups really nimble, and it makes early companies really effective, is that they have a smaller team. They can iterate really quickly. They can change their business process. They can change their infrastructure. They can change how they do things. And they can just tell everybody in Slack, like, hey, by the way, this is different now. And everyone's like, cool, great, sounds good. And instead you talk about global organizations. You talk about hundreds or thousands of reps in different regions and time zones and different structures. And you have to care a lot more about how are we making sure that we're building something that is usable on a long tail, as opposed to something that, like, it can work as long as you know all the right inputs. And I think being able to guide folks in that way matters a lot.
Yeah.
I think what we've, go ahead, Mark.
No, what I was going to say is that, you know, best laid plans of mice and men, right? You know, if the decision maker has an idea of a tool because they've been sold on its functionality and the data that they'll have access to, but the usability and the adoption of that by the people that are going to use it is not considered, you know, it becomes a huge problem and adds to like the shelfware that compounds in various organizations. I think that, you know, in the CPQ space in which DealHub operates, you know, the kind of biggest traditional player there is a lot of, you know, connotation negative experiences that end users have of that product, specifically because, you know, the data that it provides is very robust, but the end user experience is not optimized. And I think that there's this false dichotomy that it's either kind of one or the other, and you can't have both. And I think that that is a lie we've been sold that should be forgotten.
I think that there's the new wave of business software in general. I think that there's this sort of divergence of like UI and UX, and the optimization in that arena really started in consumer technology. And I think that as a result, we've seen that demand and that expectation extend back into business solutions. And I think that like UI and UX is a competitive advantage and matters. And I think that this is an arena where you can demonstrate it. Like, how many people are like, oh yeah, I stopped using Marketo because it looks terrible. I just like, it's terrible and I find it hard. And yeah, like you're like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And
Yep.
I think that ends up mattering long-term. And I think that people judge their companies that they work at. Like, they're like, oh, how innovative is my company by like, how good are these tools that we're going to have to use, versus they're hard, they're clunky, they look terrible, and I just feel like a drone when I have to use them. And I think that matters. And I think that that's a hard thing to explain and understand unless you really feel it. Like, just see anybody, if you have a group of friends, you have somebody who's you're going on a trip, someone has their MacBook and they flip open and they log into, you know, a HubSpot or a DealHub or a ClickUp or any of these other tools that are sort of a little bit more modern, a little bit more fluid. You see next to the other person who flips open their Lenovo and logs into Outlook, and you're just like, ugh, it looks terrible. I think that like, it ends up mattering.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think that's probably a big part of what's driven HubSpot becoming more and more of a player on the CRM side of things. It's that UI UX usability piece to the puzzle. And I think kind of all of these things we've touched on here over the last 10 or 15 minutes are all flavors of people struggling with two things I learned very early on and very much the hard way, which is, before you dive into, adding new tech, building out processes, integrating all of that stuff, pause first, then make sure you really understand what you're trying to solve for, and start at the problem, or start at the solution to the problem, and work backwards from there. And as you do so, only add complexity when it's absolutely necessary and it significantly moves the needle relative to the solving of that problem or the attainment of that goal. And if you get to that level and you go with that, backwards philosophy of it, of like, hey, we're going to start with the end result. And whenever I say start at the end result, don't start at the end result of like, hey, the data's in the place we wanted it to be. Start at the end result of like, hey, the end user is doing X, or, this is fully integrated into our processes. Salespeople will actually go and follow this new process or procedure and work backwards from there. Then you're going to find that you wind up with, a lot less, shelfware. You're going to wind up with a lot less bloat, and you're going to wind up with a much, much more highly functioning and effective, team, as well as your RevOps management that has a few more hairs on their head. No offense, Mark.
Oh, wow. Throwing shade. All right. No, I appreciate it. I think that we have a question here that I think is pretty relevant to this particular, slide that we're on. So I'll cue it up for the group. So we talked about everyone knowing someone who's built elaborate systems within HubSpot that become antiquated. How do you identify what to build within your HubSpot so that you can create something useful? Maybe we can kind of take it a level higher and kind of make it broadly for all tools or we can take it specific to HubSpot as well. I think, Jason, you kind of touched on something that is useful there, that is kind of work backwards from, the end result, as opposed to, just building for the sake of building, which I think leads to a lot of these kind of things. Look for if there's a problem that exists, and you need to solve that problem, and not kind of have the solution looking for a problem. That's kind of the killer. But I'm interested to hear, Connor, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. My short answer is pay me. The long answer that's a little bit more nuanced and honest. So I think that we will see more and more organization, and you already see companies at the highest level do this. Like the reason that organizations like Capgemini and Slalom and Accenture and all of these folks exist is not because once companies get really, really big, they forget how to do everything themselves and they just like outsource it all to some random consulting firm. I think they have a very clear idea and knowledge that their expertise and understanding of these products and platforms is just never going to be as vast as somebody whose job it is to have expertise and knowledge on these products and platforms. I think we're going to see similar things happen in the HubSpot ecosystem, as we've already seen happen in Salesforce, where there are dedicated Salesforce CPQ consulting firms. Like that's all they do. And there are dedicated Salesforce Commerce Cloud or Marketing Cloud. And there are some that are saying, hey, look, we'll support all of the products. But the vast majority of them, when they say that, are like, really what we mean is like Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. Like that's what we actually mean. And like you want to do these other things, it's a bit more specific. I think what we see in the HubSpot universe today is you have a lot of partners that are basically, hey, I have consultants and I will give you a person and they are an outsourced admin. And that is who you can talk to and that is who you can work with. I think where we're sort of taking Aptitude 8, and where I think that we're going to see more and more of HubSpot partners evolve to, is we don't staff any customer with an individual, because no one individual can know all of those things. And I think that that's also applicable, to your point, for the internal staff in an organization. You can absolutely be a RevOps leader in an organization and be very capable of the product owner and the decision maker and the stack decisions and the rest of it. But when it comes to what are the specifics of this individual platform and how does it function, you ought to be looking at external consulting or expertise, because you just won't go as deep as they will. And you need other people to come in and help you know and understand what innovation is possible and where does that go. And I think organizations should think more about, how do I build, educate, and equip product owners with great external resources to help them continue to build and adapt over time, instead of how do I make sure I have all of that expertise in-house. And sort of my long tail prediction for where a lot of this is going to go, it's going to look a lot like legal firms. It's going to look a lot like accounting firms, where even if you're like, hey, I have a finance department, I have a CFO, I've got a controller, I'm doing an annual audit, and I have people I'm talking to about tax. And I think the exact same thing is going to come into RevOps and systems infrastructure. Is you may do all of that, but you need somebody to come in who's really like, look, we are paying attention to the fine-tooth details of all of this, and we can help you continue to adapt and expand. And I think long tail, that's really what we're going to see.
Yeah, and I think that for this, final point, this is like the thing I've been harping on throughout, but it's really like the one thing you can count on is change, right? Like that is a truism that exists now and always will. You can count on change, taxes, and death, I think, is like the full thing. But it's like, and I think that it's pretty clear that the pace of that change is increasing, and that the way in which we plan and configure tools and processes needs to take that into account. And my concern is that there are so many companies that are living on timelines that existed, 2021. 2020, 2019, and not kind of where we are today. I there's been a lot of washout, and I don't think we've fully washed out yet. And so I hope that message gets across that anything you do, any changes you make, any processes you implement has to be done to understand that what's true today is not necessarily true tomorrow, and being able to make it highly configurable and change when needed should be a core pillar of whatever implementation you're doing.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. And it's where we touched on it, but beware unnecessary complexity. because it makes that ability to be nimble and deal with change that much harder. You start stacking, multiple layers of, automation and integration on top of each other, and then you need to change something that's 2, 3, 4 layers deep. Guess what happens to everything built on top of it? It all comes, crumbling down and stops working. And then, anytime you're customizing things, like, one, be careful with how far you go down it, but also do it in as modular a fashion as possible, so that you can go in and tweak and play with things in a relatively confined nature, where it's not going to go and upend everything else with it. And so, I think those are good sort of strategies and philosophies relative to what you're talking about, Mark. But always remember, it's only going to be good, and it's only going to be where it needs to be for so long. So we got a couple of or questions that came in from Matthew. We just have a couple of minutes left, but let's see. So saying that struggle with got it. Starting with elaborate systems, so keeping a pulse on what's going on, release, and plan accordingly. So yeah, talking about same types of things here, far from exact science, but for example, if you've grown to need or edit your lifecycle stages to match new processes, we've deprioritized this effort. We watch HubSpot's new lead object mature, and so yeah, it's a great example of kind of how to anticipate this type of change and these types of things coming down the pipe, and getting away from that, as I call it, if we build it, they will come strategy. Like, we know absolutely exactly what's needed and exactly what they're going to flock to and adopt and all of that stuff. And then more often than not, you get it out in the wild and you miss the mark, or even if you nailed it, you only nailed it for so long. And so, be careful, be nimble with how you're building these things.
For sure. And identify internal design partners that, if you are building something, have, I spoke to somebody for a podcast recently who said he looks for kind of the most needy or difficult person within the organization, and that's the design partner internally that he works with for any kind of thing that he's building, because they're going to kind of identify any of these issues before, that may come up. And so definitely just like product people who are building for buyers, external buyers, will work with design partners as they add new features. Identify those internal partners, design partners, about new things that you're going to add to the stack, or another layer of complexity that you're considering, before you actually just kind of push it on everybody.
Yeah, it's a strategy I developed, kind of fell into early on, but especially with sales teams. If you find those 1, 2, or 3, if you get beyond that, it becomes a nightmare to try and figure out what's user error versus what's actually a problem with tech or process. But get those handful that are really engaged and really excited about what you're doing from an ops standpoint, and get them involved in it. Have them be your skunk works, have them be your guinea pig. And then if you want to roll something out successfully to a sales team, demonstrate that gave one of their peers an unfair advantage. And instead of them howling about some new thing you're trying to get them to do, see them bang down the door and be pissed off that you gave that advantage to somebody else early on. Talk about a trick for getting a sales team to adopt something. But yeah, I mean, great insights, guys. Great strategy. We're here at the top of the hour. Connor, personally, I got to follow up with you on what you were talking about with the HIPAA compliant stuff with HubSpot, because it turns out I'm in the process of standing up my wife's med spa right now, and I'm tackling exactly that problem of how do I integrate this god awful HIPAA compliant piece of software with HubSpot, so that we can get things into an actual manageable place. So fortuitous that we were on this together. I got to hit you up on that front.
Happy to. And I know somebody who is the spouse of one of our executives who has a little tiny agency, and all they predominantly focus on is med spas and that type of thing for HubSpot. And so I may even have a better than, hey, we can go dev you something referral for you, but shoot me an email, shoot me a link. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks so much, Mark. So much, Connor. It was a great conversation. Really thoroughly enjoyed this. Thanks everybody for joining us. We will get a recap out to you within the next day. And if you have any additional questions or anything like that for any of the panelists, please shoot those over to us. You can reply to the email. Obviously, everybody's in the Red Genius Slack community, and happy to be ongoing resources for everyone.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for coming.